Hey guys, welcome to the episode on how to focus on your squat technique. So today we're going to talk about a couple different things that may be a little bit more obscure than you typically hear from how you should be squatting. And that's based on the experience I've had working with a lot of different athletes and a lot of different type of squats that we've now been able to universally apply certain principles to any type of squatter, to any level of individual, no matter how much you've been working out or what type of sport or training you do. So let's get into this. So what we're going to talk about first is we're going to talk about foot position. And the biggest thing when it comes to foot position is I typically see people come in that have been told to drive through their heels. And while that's not necessarily wrong, what we're missing from the ability to create the most power as possible and still maintain good orthopedic health is we want to make sure you're also focusing on the other aspects of your foot. And that's your big toe and your little toe. So when it comes to squatting, you want to actually make sure that you're trying to treat your squat more like you're trying to jump. And the reason for that is very simple. If I ask you to jump up as high as you can and try to touch the ceiling or wherever you are you going to jump off your heels? Your answer is probably no. So if the answer is no, why are you trying to squat that way? That's really what we're trying to achieve in terms of your squat mechanics, or the exercise as itself is, it's meant to promote the ability to create more power. And that power is going to translate to a jump or to a run or to a lunge or to even just going up and down the stairs without pain. So we don't want to reinforce bad mechanics. So we want to treat that as such that it's going to apply to whatever your workout or your training, your sport is. So that's number one. And the reason for making sure you treat it like a jump and not just push down through your heels, but actually focus on keeping your weight through your shoelaces is a push versus pull principle. So when I am driving through my heels, when I am going to squat like I've been told and everyone's been saying, and when I go into that, essentially when I come back up, I'm pulling myself up using my quad muscles. So now it's a lot of stress on my quads, which isn't good for your knees. It's a lot of stress on your hip flexors, which isn't good for your hips, and it's a lot of stress on your back. So if you're trying to be able to get out of bed the next day and not feel like an old individual, or geriatric age, we'll call them, then you want to make sure you're not doing that. You want to make sure that you're doing what we call more of a push. So instead of going into this pull mechanism, you want to go into a push where it's more like a jump, where I actually keep my weight through more of my shoelaces and I drive up off of more of my feet. So I'm keeping more of that weight down through those shoelaces. And it doesn't mean that I'm lifting my heels off. I'm actually still keeping my foot down on the ground as much as I can. Now, if you can't do this without lifting your heels off, then that's something where you can just put a plate or you put something underneath your heel to still achieve this. So all we're gonna do is just make sure my big toes stay down, I'm here, and I drive forward. And yes, that does mean your knees go in front of your toes, because we're not in 1950 anymore. Your knees are supposed to go in front of your toes for the sole purpose of that's the ability to create that proper function at the pelvis and at the spine. If I don't let my knees go in front of my toes, you're going to drive off your heels and your knees are going to hurt. So make sure that you allow your knees to go freely in front of your toes. And that's what leads into the next thing we're going to talk about, which is creating better pelvic position. Because when we do this, that's what allows us to keep the stress in the core, in the hips and glutes, not in your quads. So when I think about what I want from a core position, we want to make sure your shoulder, your hips, and your ankle are all in the same line. So most people, when they squat, they're told to keep their chest up, and what typically happens when they do that is they then stick their butt out. And now you're set up like this. And that's going to really create a poor position under stress or under intensity. So if I'm positioned like this and I go into that squat, then I'm going to lose a lot of positioning and tension here. I'm going to put that stress on the hip flexor and on the quad and on my back. And that's going to lead to you doing more of a deadlift opposed to actually squatting. So what we want to do is actually focus on tucking your hips underneath of you. And for a lot of individuals, that means it's going to feel kind of like a slouch. Like it's going to feel like you're kind of in this really kind of awkward, bad posture position. But in reality, this is actually where you should be. And we know it's correct because you're going to feel tension in those lower abs. So when I'm in this position, I have tension in those lower abs. I'm going to treat my squat like I'm jumping. I'm here, and I'm pushing back up. Just like that. First one, I went a little bit on my heels. So we want to make sure you're staying tucked, you're keeping that weight through the center or through your shoelaces, and you're driving through that motion. The last thing, and probably the most important, is how do we distribute our weight when we do come out of the hole? Now, this comes to the biggest thing that we hear, driving your knees out. So again, this cue isn't necessarily the whole story. We don't necessarily prioritize where your knees are. We want to prioritize where the pressure is in your feet. And what that means is you want to put more of your weight towards the inside of your feet. So you want almost like a 60-40 split from inside to outside. So we're not trying to push your knees together. We're just trying to keep that weight towards the inside so you can really create that good solid structure. So what we don't want is being here and going into this. If we go into this, what that does is if we're rolling on the outside of our feet, we're going to roll up the hips. We roll up the hips, it's more quads, it's more hip flexors, it's more back. And that's what we're trying not to do if you're trying to make sure you don't don't go into pain. So that's where if we keep those feet down and keep those big toes down, planted to the ground, when I go through this motion and push down, I can really keep that nice, good, stable structure that allows me to keep that stress right in the hip, not in your back. So that's the other big cue we're thinking of. So when it comes to your squats, you want to think of these things. You want to think of keeping a nice, good tuck through your pelvis so you keep that good ab engagement. And you want to focus on big toes. So it's lower abs, big toes. And big toe is going to keep you in a good, more forward position, not in your heels. And it's also going to keep you more towards a good, solid position of foot pressure opposed to rolling to the outside of the foot. So make sure you think about your big toes, your lower abs, with your squat mechanics. If you can't do your normal squat mechanics with that, you feel like you lose it, then you only go through as much range of motion as you can. Or you go into a box squat or a different variation. So try different things, but really focus on those mechanics, and it's going to clean up a lot of your orthopedic health as well as your performance. Thanks for checking this video out. If you guys have any questions, please let us know, and we'll see you in the next one.